Kurt
Good morning,
Doolittle,
Dr. Brad.
the spectacular Kurt Doolittle on his birthday even.
Yes, on my birthday even.
How about that?
We're going to celebrate with I'll celebrate. At least I'm going to go visit Brandon and family
That'll be nice.
tomorrow.
That'll be nice. That's very good.
I can't. I have to work even on my birthday because you are all slave drivers.
Sorry.
And no, none of you are sorry. You all saw you're sorry, but you're happy.
Oh, I'm sorry we're slave drivers. I'm sorry that it irritates some people, I suppose. Some folks don't like that. That's all right. We're
I'm having a little allergy thing this morning, so Brad said, let's start early. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I got to take my allergy pill though, because otherwise I'll be sniffling for the first 40 minutes.
what I'll do is I'll warm you up.
You'll warm me up?
Allow the allergy.
Dude, that sounds sexy. Most of the time it's women that are talking about warming them up.
That's right, Kurt.
You're not going to let me get distracted. You're not going to let me take this in the gutter or anything.
No, I'm sorry, Kurt.
All my friends, they get wise to me. And I can't get, they see all the buildups and they deprive me of my joy.
Coming. That's like, it's like a wind up, like, here it comes.
All the joy in my life.
The interesting thing, this week was an interesting week because I was checking the popular sentiments. There was an article that came out said 28% of the people think that it may be necessary to violently overthrow the government.
Yes. That's a lot. It used to be single digits.
Right. And so I broached the subject with my patients that are what I recognize as good Americans, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I basically broached it like this. It's like the government is, the United States government is occupied by Marxists, as the European government is. And that organization is at war with the Russians and the Chinese. And I'm a defeatist, which is to say that if the United States loses in that conflict, then perhaps the Americans can get control of their government again. And it's like this, that sentiment was well appreciated by those people. And it's like that may present an opportunity for resolution of this problem by ballot rather than by bullet.
Yes.
And the population was in general agreement with that premise. There you have that story.
Well, of course, I live in New England, which is it's like this. It's California light up here.
I got nothing to say except.
I mean, what's the name? I think it's really funny that Sowell and Thomas are the two intellectual heavyweights of our age, of the moment. Thomas Sowell, and they're both black, which tells you something very important. It got nothing to do with.
It's a colorblind issue.
It's a colorblind issue because they both started out believing the false promise, and they came awake. And so and once because they look into the false promises and they're smart enough to look into those false promises and see the consequences. So the question. So in any event, I just find it really interesting that if I have to look at who might, with Scalia gone, who's an Italian Catholic, and with being taken over by Thomas, who's a Southern Black Catholic, and I don't know what religion is Sowell. He doesn't sound Catholic to me.
I don't know.
He must be what's his name? Thomas. So religion. No, you won't say that. It'll give me. Let's just go back into his. Yeah, he went to Harvard and all that stuff. I know. Born in poverty, North Carolina, grew up in New York. And the other thing I want to say is he served in the Marine Corps, which, as far as I can tell, is whatever the Marines do, we need to do for the whole population.
Boy, they're rough. They're good guys. They're not playing games.
Well, it's because it's not a combined arms force. It's a rifle, it's a rifle. So it's individuals working with individuals with limited resources. And so, it doesn't say his religion here. I have it in my head that he was raised a boring, one of the, Baptists or something.
I would think it was a mainline Protestant.
It doesn't say. Anyway, I've literally read everything he's written,
Yeah.
and there's minor. In retrospect, I've come to minor, things where I look. Realize when I went to school, I was taught criticism, not critique. Criticism. Criticism is a way of, in other words, demonstrating that you understand and appreciate an artist's or author's thinking by demonstrate it, not by saying, oh, I agree, but I found this little thing here. So I was taught that, being in my head for 4 years, right? It's really a compliment to give someone to have a minor dispute, a meaningless dispute with someone over our taste in color, right?
Right, minor details, right?
Minor detail. So this is how you know that you're speaking honestly about someone. In other words, it's an example of intellectual honesty when you can find some minor disagreement despite massive agreement, right? Because you can casually say, oh, I agree with everything, but that doesn't illustrate that you know what the fuck you're talking about.
That's right.
So when I'm criticizing somebody that's a near neighbor, it's an illustration of honesty and respect, right? So when I look at Sewell, his thing on intellectuals is what we call credentialists, right?
Yeah.
And then he goes the vision of the anointed, which we position a little. So in other words, he has this a little more poetic or philosophical or maybe marketing.
Yes.
And he wraps things in. But generally, he's like a friend of mine, engineering friend of mine said, he doesn't have any floating pins, which is what happens when you have an IC chip that's very complicated and you put data in.
Yeah.
And the data comes out, right? But once in a while, the data, you put the same data in and you get the data out, the different data out, the data floats between pins. So he just doesn't do that ever. I mean, he's like literally never wrong. And it's exasperating that we don't why don't we just use him as the baseline, right, for most education? And I found somebody did a video on a book in math that we should use as the baseline in education. Because it looks like what's happened, all the credentialed people have added layers of flower and indirection and novelty to the point where the original path has been, and its simplicity has been lost. In other words, that's another effect of credentialism, is layering.
Yeah, it's obscurantism.
Well, they don't even they're trying to create an innovation to direct attention, but what they're actually doing is they're adding new ways of thinking. The new way of thinking is actually a distraction from the.
I was honestly talking to a child and her mother about mathematics and how math is done, And it's like the child showed me how they tried to get them to do math, like multiplication. And I'm like, what in the hell are they doing? And it's like, if you don't do it this way, you lose points on you. You have to do this nonsensical thing with see some boxes and some strangeness that I'm like, that mother can't teach this to your child. That's stupid.
Well, it's also important that just addition and multiplication and division, it's just memorization and trial and error. Right? I mean, and it's like learning your ABCs, right? You just have to learn them, right? I mean, it
All
just,
it is, it's a grind on
right,
it.
it's a
Now that's
grind.
good.
Then, and anyway, so this book is, I shared this with Michael Sarago on Twitter because I just ran across this guy wrote this book, of course, in the early 40s, which is just about the end, right? The pre-war method of thinking becomes the post-war method of thinking at the post-war, in the post-war period. But just in this early 40s, you see this. It's quite good in the 20s. What you notice after the First World War is during the First World War, they learned that you had to talk down to the soldiers. And this had a pervasive effect across society of dumbing down. And the Second World War made it worse. The attempt to get more people to go to college made it worse in the post-war period. And of course, mass communication is in the war against institutions and cultural production. So, you really see the flowering of thinking sort of dying, by and my grandfather was educated in what, the 20s, the early 20s. So he was a contemporary of the publication of Einstein. So that was my grandfather's, that was his big thing, right? He was in college when Einstein came out with this stuff, and it was, that was the revolutionary in thinking.
Sure.
Right. And, but it really goes downhill after those events. And you can see it in the sentence structure of Lincoln.
Oh my Lord.
Right. And the sentence structure today, which is clicks and grunts.
It is.
I mean, it shouldn't have been like you and I, we do long chains of reasoning. I'm notorious for, creating long chains of reason, describing the formation of the universe up to human cognition, right? As illustration that it's possible. But I mean, our people, they're like, if it's got more than X number of syllables in it, they have been sufficiently non-trained to get them. Like, how do you can understand why a person in 1850 or 1870 could read the Bible as not only scripture, but as something to be thought about and interpreted.
Right.
You could see that same person looking at the natural world and playing that same interpretation or written communications. But the more information we have, the more soundbited it's become. But sound bites it's emerged into. The more a collection of sound bites it's become. I hate the word become. That's why I was sort of stuttering there, because it's a verb to be, and I try to.
Oh, wait, I have to riff off that a little bit, because we were talking about this last time. The I am thing, right? The verb to be. Okay. So I looked this up. I said, how do you say that in Hebrew? Because it's like Moses is talking to God, right? He's talking to God, and he says, exactly who am I to say sent me to the Israelites? What do I tell them? Who do I say sent me? He says, God says, I am that I am. And it's like that becoming, okay? The I am, you say in Hebrew, like, ahoy. There you have it. It's like, it's pirate talk, man. There you have it. Sorry for the deviation, but I want to introduce this episode as 2034 for the audience. Hit like and subscribe, notification buttons, leave the comments, please.
So did you feel we were getting off track there with that discussion or something?
No, but it's like this interesting function, because it is the verb to be, to become. which is related to this. The reason that sparked this discourse on my side was you said that you have discovered the origin, like the code of the universe, the universal code, and it is like this. It is becoming.
Yeah. Well,
It
okay.
is.
Good.
It is. Boy, it is that. You see where I'm going?
Yeah.
That's all it is. That's the name of it. It is the becoming, the evolutionary function. There you have it. That's all.
No, it's great. I just didn't. But before that, we were discussing.
To be.
Well, I was saying we got to that because I was trying to avoid the word become.
Yes.
And I forgot now the train of thought that we were on.
You are. I apologize for that. And it's like you were discussing the well, I don't know. It doesn't matter. We'll think of it if it recurs. But it had to do with the avoidance of the verb to be, right?
Well, that was.
It was. You were talking about the evolution of teaching.
Oh,
in
okay.
general
That's
sense.
okay. Because that's like I don't think I was done with that.
I apologize.
And so what I was getting at is that we've been dumbing people down for a long time, or you could think about it is we've been including more people over time, right? If we include more people over time, you're going to necessarily dumb things down over time. Is that really true? Well, it's not true if you have a population that's genetically middle class, majority middle class, but if you don't have a population that's majority genetically middle class, it is going to happen. So these are all interesting problems of scale. I mean, obviously you have the people that we tied this into our last conversation, which is demonstrated competency. You have people who can potentially demonstrate competency, and you have people who cannot potentially demonstrate competency. And you have people who are unwilling to demonstrate competency. And so the problem becomes is when you want to create a bunch of institutions and norms in what we call a democracy, which means a voluntary order, you eventually run out of people who can demonstrate competency necessary for participation, not only in decision making, but actually demonstrate competency for comprehension of the question itself.
What is interesting? So does
that make sense?
Yeah, I would say this. It's the inclusion and failure to maintain the elite functionality of the high adaptive population to continue to have high standards of training. So it's inclusion, it's mixing them all together and not maintaining the high standard of training that you had previously provided to the ones who can have high quality
thinking. So that's because our education system originally was created to produce, to train the upper middle, and upper classes to participate in administration of the state through law, medicine, theology, education, and medicine. It probably should medicine, which is care, pedagogy, which is religion, and law, which is rule, right? I mean, it's and regulation, which is rule. And then the rest of the people's job was largely to produce.
Yes.
Well, so what's happened though is that that because education is so profitable, and because we had such a need for scientists in the post-war period to compete with the Russians, we invested heavily in education. And in doing that, not only basic education, which was to make workers during the Industrial Revolution, but we invested in higher education in order to make workers for the technological revolution. And this is a thinking revolution, just as we've been investing more heavily in making workers for the clerical revolution, which is working with computers and things like that. So we've done this. The problem is is that we haven't, is that the education system now doesn't distinguish between making people capable of rule, right, because they're demonstrated competency, making people capable of technology through demonstrated competency, and making people through clerical performances. That's all great, right? The problem is that what we're talking about is decline, going from aristocratic management of the polity to working class, working class educated sufficient enough to operate machines, to the middle class capable of working technology, to the lower middle class working to produce clerical workers. What's happened though is that we've somehow got this situation where the credentialed have replaced the capable, the demonstratedly capable, which, in history we've got a million names for, between Peter Principle and every other version. The problem is, of course, is that we're running out. We're not producing enough people of competence, and what we're doing is producing people of credentials. And the problem is, the reason they're credentialed instead of competent is they need more information and more regulation in order to do their jobs. In other words, they have lesser adaptive ability. So what, of course, is happening is they're creating friction. Now, we don't think of it as, we can say, well, religious groups originally organized to create friction for the same purpose against the aristocracy. But then what's happened is we've created a new employment religion that's created friction against the aristocracy. That employment religion is made of credentialed people. And we've pretty much outcast from society all the uncredentialed people, because uncredentialed people come from only two disciplines. They come from the military and the market. So, right now, you could say, excuse me, I forgot one. From the intergenerational family and the market and the military. It's important because that's what nobility is. You've maintained internal discipline in your family over enough generations to get into and remain in the nobility. So that's a really important factor that the Marxists, of course, sought to undermine at every expense, right? That's really the original Jewish attack is against the aristocracy for that reason, because they're credentialed culture, as is right, and so well, they didn't have credential, but it's a cult, that culture. So the war against the aristocracy became a war against Western civilization. I don't want to bring that in there. I realized I brought that in there. It would make you sort of squirm. So I'll just go back to, there are three methods of demonstrating competency: family, economy, and military. And what we've got now is credentialism, not competency. Okay, did I make my case there? Because I went a bit of a
I didn't squirm though, did I?
Well, I just psychologically anticipated your
you didn't see me squirm though, did you? I mean,
No.
really?
No.
Just checking, because I'm gonna just do it like this. Just like the way I talk to my patients about these matters. So we have predators who are acutely sensitive to the environment, and we have predators are acutely sensitive to the environment, the external environment. And we have herd animals, such as fish, that are schooling, that are sensitive. Only the ones at the periphery of the school are sensitive to the actual environment. The rest are sensitive to their neighbors, and it's a socially reactive organization. They're just sensitive to what their neighbor's doing, no matter what their neighbor's doing, right or wrong. Okay, so that's the schooling function. So the credentialing thing goes like this: is they are selecting for people that are sensitive to the whimsy of the moment in the credentialing organization. And so Quigley talks about it as the irrationality. Irrationality governs the intellectual life of this nation, is how he talked about it in 1960.
Yeah, because he saw it already.
No, amazing that he saw it in 1960.
Okay. I'm gonna say that's is that really true? So people saw it happening in the 1890s.
Wow.
All right. So it's not that people didn't understand what was happening, right? It's that he just was in that position where it takes a couple of decades
Yes,
to produce a guy who can put it all together.
that's right. To assemble the pieces into a intelligible format.
So I think of myself as, I had
You're one
Hayek
of
and
these guys,
Popper and Sowell
right?
and Gary Becker, and and the difference between my generation and their generation is I learned programmatic logic,
Right.
and that's it. Right? I learned operationalism, and it was a concept that didn't exist for them.
I understand you now. Like that's it's
The fact that you understand that just fills me with such joy. Not
it's
because
amazing to me. It's just what's it's interesting, but it's so it takes any sense of guilt off of the previous generations,
correct.
because there's just no way they could have assembled
There's
it
just
all.
no way they could know that. That's why I say what went wrong in 1830. It went wrong early. Is that Babbage, who was a proper English douchebag like me and Darwin and all of my other goofy family, extended family, right? Came up with the fucking right answer. But because he's so operational, he doesn't turn it into theoretical.
Oh, I see. It's too practical.
He's too practical. He died making the machine. I mean, making a computer that big, right? Because he was so fascinated by what the technique could do.
Right.
And he didn't translate it and this is
what is the significance of it? Yeah.
He didn't translate the significance of it. To some degree, his wife did, which is a great example of male and females cognition, is she basically did begin to understand. So she could communicate it, but it never turned into a Turing. So we never got a Chomsky. So we never got a Doolittle. Right. I mean, and historically it's obvious. So you can't, there's no blame on prior generation. I mean, can you blame these guys? Well, no, but you can identify.
That's right. The failure points, right?
You can it's in Rome. Why didn't Rome have the Industrial Revolution? Well, it's really simple. Just human and animal labor was still too cheap. Right. That's all. I mean, so nobody had to invent. They would have invented the steam engine they had basically.
Yes.
Right? But there was no reason for it. Why do you need a steam engine to pump water out of mines?
That's it.
Right. That's why you
That's it.
That's right. And the Romans the Romans had an endless supply of animal labor.
Right. That's right.
Humans. So they didn't have the need for it. But what would have happened? We think about Rome and wealth, whatever, but this is sort of like China. You have a few people in the cities, right, that are living high off the hog on debt, but realistically, it's most of China lives to the same standard of living as sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, it's desperately poor. It's not as ignorant, but it's, in other words, they still can get an education, but China is a desperately poor country. It's sub-Saharan, which is why their authoritarianism is a little more natural. My allergies are getting to me. So anyway,
that's good.
I make my point about nobility, economy, and military making demonstrated competencies where credentialism isn't a demonstrated competency. It's preparation for competency in a niche. Correct?
Yeah.
The purpose of credentialism is to produce specialist roles underneath those who have demonstrated human competency in the three markets: family, economy, and military. And so what you did, it's so obvious. I mean, so you go back to Quigley, which I'm sorry if I came across as criticizing him, I
No, I
was.
did not regard it as such.
Okay, it's like the same thing with Soul. Like, well, he uses a little more flowery language. I mean, but I mean, Soul didn't have operational language either, right? Right. So you can't. You made a great point, which is you can't look back in history and blame people unless they made a bad choice, knowing the choices.
Right.
So when the Muslims, what's his name? God damn it, I can't remember his name. When the Muslims went fundamentalist, they didn't have to. They had the choice of continuing to integrate the not because they're in the middle, right? The Persians, not really Muslims,
Khomeini.
it's Persians. What?
You're talking about Khomeini?
No. I'm talking about 9th century.
Okay. Okay.
When they're sitting there in the Persia, right? And they've developed these schools. They've brought in Greek knowledge and they've brought in Indian knowledge, right? And they've brought in Roman knowledge, and they have a long history of Mesopotamian,
Yes.
Persian, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian knowledge, right? They've got this whole thing, right? Because that's the whole benefit of the Middle East, despite being a shithole. It's got these river valleys, and it's at the intersection of the 4 continents and the 5 geographic differences. So I mean, you're sitting there, and Persia's in the spot at the time, but the guy, I mean, I can't remember his name. I can see his face actually, and I can't remember his name. He says, no, we need to take the scripture literally. And then Islam goes downhill. So there's really, when they talk about the golden age of Islam, it's actually the golden age of Persia, and of Arabized Persia. And it's made possible by the fact that all these other civilizations have collapsed because of war, just like the Bronze Age collapsed. So like Napoleon looted all of Europe, the Muslims looted all of the ancient world and destroyed the whole fucking thing, just like Napoleon destroyed the Holy Roman Empire. The Muslims destroyed the Mesopotamian, the Levantine, the Egyptian, the North African, the Persian, the Anatolian, the Northwest Indian. They destroyed all those freaking civilizations, right? And so they took all the stuff together. Now, Napoleon took mostly physical arts, but the Muslims took not only that, but all this requisite knowledge that had been a superior advantage over the Arabs, right? So just like it'd be like taking technology. Well, they took conceptual technology, but what happened? They went back to their basics, which is what we all do. We go back to our group evolutionary strategy, and within 200 years, they doubled down, and Islam stopped being a progressive force in I guess the 11th century, 1000, 900, 1000. I have like a 2-century window of error in the Muslim timeline because I'm not.
That's all right.
It's like I can say, we know that, I mean, there's just it's because these things aren't, I mean, even the Napoleonic era, right? It lasts for quite a while,
That's
but
right.
back then, changes lasted longer, or the Enlightenment here. Anyway, I've made my point that we had a great talk on credentialism, which I don't know, the guys want to retitle.
My theory is to incorporate the names
Yes.
of the people mentioned so that they can tag it in and amplify in some fashion. I don't know.
So they're starting to put witty names on the clips.
Good job.
So I don't know. I'm leaving that up to you guys. This is something you guys are handling. I don't want to get my hand in that. So right. I trust the team.
That's right.
So So anyway, so if I've made that point as an extension of our last discussion, then that's good. I was wondering if you have anything else that you wanted to cover today.
No, I was just I'll give you the final element of warm up, which is this, the discourse that, the refinement of the discourse we have with our patients. Okay.
Okay.
It goes like this. You're going to be the patient. It goes like, so Kurt, you're not my customer in the way, in the examination room, talking to the patient. You're not my patient here. Okay. And the patient is not my customer.
Correct.
The hospital is my customer. And the insurance company is the customer of the hospital, and the patient is the customer of the insurance company. And when I provide medical services to the patient, is as a service to my customer, to their customer, to them. And it's like goes through this long chain of corporate interference. And I have to satisfy the needs of all the corporations in between. And I have to make it so that I have to overcome the resistance of that chain in order to get the patient what they need. Because the patient thinks they paid for the service. They didn't. They paid for someone to interfere with the service, and they expect them to pay for the service. So the patient's trying to avoid paying for the service and therefore subjects themselves to all the interference in between. And it's not my fault if the machine doesn't function the way you want it to function. I'm trying. I'm
the doctor. I'm not responsible for the
I'm the fall guy for the corporate chain in between, because you're going to get mad at somebody when it resists.
I'm the only responsible person you have an interface with. Everybody else is layers of
unavoidable that my face will be in front of your face. It's like, it's okay.
So again, I don't understand why doctors aren't independent professionals. No, I don't understand why we don't do that, or don't do what I would like to make doctors independent professionals. I think hospitals are it's okay if they treat them as a business, because businesses are produce better returns on capital, but I'm not sure they should be for-profit businesses. Right. I think financing for hospitals should be at zero interest from the treasury. Right. Any debt that a hospital needs to incur.
It's tough. It's like, because it's like, how do they have to function in a market?
Right. But a market for what? It's not a market, and they have to function in markets. So the question is, do they need to be in a position where they have to be in search of capital, which they can afford to repay? But that's all. They don't need to be able, because most of the time, this is the problem with economics, is that that some things produce capital. Like building a house produces capital. It doesn't consume capital. So you're just moving future capital into the present with interest. That's all you do. In other words, by debt, right? With interest, you're paying for the difference. That's what interest is. It's the difference between having it now and later.
That's right.
But when you're just moving capital forward and there's no one to pay because you're borrowing it from the government, right? Because the government is the treasury of future capital. It's not real money. It's just a promise to pay, right? So once you move that capital forward, there's no reason to collect interest on it. There would be if it was for consumption, but it's not. It's for production. Well, it's the same thing for a human body. If you're like out there going it because you want to go take the kids to Disney World, that's for consumption. But if you're taking it for your medical care, that's creating human capital, right? That's preserving it. So I don't really understand why this is a complicated economic issue. It really shouldn't. If the state can afford to do the lending for this and the people can pay it back, that's great. And of course, because we're all insuring each other, there's some back and forth going on, right? So, and the reason you want to do that is because scale reduces costs for everybody. So I don't understand independent thing, non-profit institutions right? Right? You don't tax them or anything, right? They're nonprofit. There's no tax in this whole fucking system. And then, um, and then people are insured the same way they're lent, right? I mean, it's just a fucking, it's not a nonprofit. The difference is that if you took all the money that's made by the insurance industry, you can understand how it works, right? Is
Yes.
they just take your money and they invest it. They
Yes.
keep some of the investment as profits, and then the more of the investment, the more of your cost they don't pay, the more they get to keep as profit. Right? So why is that? Why is that a for-profit industry when it's purely statistical? In other words,
Right.
why isn't the government taking that money and investing that money in order to pay for a thing? In other words, this is a nonprofit industry. There's no need for profit in this business. There's need for cost. There's no need for profit. And there's certainly no need for financial profit. Right? In other words, all that's happening is the government is licensing someone to indirectly profit from taxing everybody so that they can raise the cost of medical service. They cannot pay for medical service, so they can increase their profits by not paying for medical. And so once you realize what's going on here, it's a fucking scam. It's rent-seeking scam and a half. And I'm like saying, just eliminate the fucking rent-seeking scam and a half. Well, who did that? Singapore. Why? Because it's run by a fucking smart guy who actually understood economics and human behavior, was free of Western Christian ideological goodness. So he just looked at it practically, right? I'm just saying that the problem with us Christians is we give the benefit of the doubt when there's no reason to give the benefit of the doubt, right? So in other words, when money's involved. So this is a complete, I just look at the economics of this, I'm like, this is a completely logically, physically, and operationally solvable problem that should cut all of these middlemen out of the fucking thing, out of it. And if I'm a doctor like you, I'm going to charge whatever the fuck I can get for my time. And and what's going to happen is that people will sort by what their contribution. In other words, I mean, if the government says a doctor, and because housing determines the rate, all housing prices consume all increase of housing prices eventually consume all increases in local payroll. Starts name of this effect starts with an M. I'm forgetting this name. Right. So what happens? You look at the difference in housing prices in a fucking community, and you know what percentage to pay. Of the state has to pay, right? Because it's relevant. Because that's all that really matters. Technically, we all consume about the same. All that's difference is density, which increases housing prices, which increases, right? It's just, the economy is really so simple if you just work through it step by step, right? So there's no reason the government can't say, well, doctors in this area are going to get this much because that's the cost of living here, and it's just statistics.
It's very interesting because it's like this. It's like so this is.
Wait. Let me finish because I'm.
My apologies.
So the answer is that so what you get is what we've got today, which is guys like me. We hire concierge doctors.
That's right.
Right. You hire a concierge. You pay the guy $5-10 grand a year. Some of them cost 50 grand a year. Right. And they get, and if you get a doctor, a concierge doctor, he might keep 12 families. If he's getting 50 grand each from him, he doesn't need anything else. No. How great is his fucking job, right? How much care does everybody get now, right?
As much as they need.
Right. You don't care, right? I mean, if you're getting 50 grand from 10 families, you're making big bucks, and you get to use the hospital and everything else, right? And you make all the fucking decisions. Now, the thing is that the government gets, however, if we do it the way I'm talking about, which is subsidized, right? So we subsidize doctors at a fixed rate in each pick and geography. Then if I want to pay extra because I want that care, I pay for it. So what I'm paying for is service.
That's right.
That's all I'm paying for. It's a difference in service quality. It's the same thing as if I go in a bed, which kind of room do I get? Like I used to have fancy healthcare. I don't anymore. I used to have fancy healthcare. Fancy healthcare meant that I got my own private room and all the bullshit, whatever, right? But sometimes you don't get a private room. You get a shared room, or you get a room with lots of people in it, right? That just all depends on how much, because there's different costs. That's paying for service. It's not paying for care.
Correct.
And so I don't understand whether we just don't have this as a really simple system where the government can negotiate some prices like medicines and commodities, right? The hospitals deal with their nonprofit like the church used to, because that's how it works best, by the way. And then the professionals are just independent professionals, and their relationship is with the patient. The patient has the money through his own money plus the subsidy of the state, and then there's a doctor-parent relationship. But there's no insurance company, right? There's it's just statistics. Statistically, the government says across this, because this is all it is, right? You know what an actuarial is? It's a
Yes.
statistician, right? It's a statistician. All right. So as actuarial just looks at the data every year and says, okay, well, the cost of MRIs is going up because of this particular thing and this, but we're finding that, there's an awful lot of people charging for MRIs because there's profit in charging for MRIs. But
Yeah.
if we remove the profit from charging for MRIs, it was a cost-based system and people are salary, there's no malincentive to charge to have extra MRIs. Do some people want to have MRIs that aren't necessary? Sure.
They do.
Right. I had one last year because I had this nerve damage in my face. Right. Went out and, well, it's not what that is. It's probably from the surgery, right, that I had before. But there's nothing going. Well, we know there's nothing going on in here that's worth much, but there's nothing going on up there that's affecting my face. So yeah, sure. Did I really need that one? It's a cosmetic thing. Did I really need it?
I'm not your doctor, man. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I know, but
But it's like this.
Did I need it?
I would say that yeah, I wouldn't be able to render a judgment.
Right, exactly. Right. So, but some patient might say, well, it's going to cost
I know,
me.
it's a fascinating function when the patients go, I want an MRI. I'm like, that won't get it.
No, well, wait a minute. But here's the difference: is the patients, I want it, and I have enough money in my healthcare fund, my personal healthcare fund, to pay for that, and the state's going to subsidize X amount of it, and so fine. I mean, I'll pay for it. Then the person just makes a rational choice.
That's right.
Because the doctor says, well,
that's a good word to use, by the way, rational, because they're rationing out their funds.
They're rationing out their funds. So I mean, it just, any economist should be able to make this decision just by looking at the problem. The issue is that all this bad thinking got into us all this bad thinking starts it comes from the Marxist originally, but it really gets in the economy in the 50s, in the post-war period. It starts out, obviously, somebody said the other day, we're still living with the fucked up experiment that the FDR created.
It looks like to me we're unraveling that 20 eras of the 20th century are unraveling as we speak, bit by bit.
And so we're just going back to that. But it's been a really expensive experiment for us. Look what it was for the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians, and the South Americans are never going to recover from it. Shit, they're still caught up in it because they believe this Marxist shit is possible. Whereas all you're trying to say is incentives, right? That's all we're saying is incentives. We're not saying throw you, and I'm certainly not saying, if anybody follows me says, you're a right winger, you're going to throw people to the market. I don't fucking say that. I say the opposite. I said, don't fucking throw people into the meat grinder of the market unless guys like you and me, well, fuck, I'll chase the goddamn, I'm a dog that'll chase a competitive market truck until it runs me over. And even then I'll go to the hospital, come back and chase the fucking truck again.
That's right.
I won't learn, right? And there's plenty of us who love this shit. And that's what makes demonstrated competency.
Right.
So, I just see the medical system as being fixed. Of course, you learn what happens here. You see a pattern. Can I rub it in for the audience?
Please.
You see a pattern developing. That pattern is that insurance is a form of gambling. The stock market as we run it is a form of gambling. Marketing as we run it is a form of gambling. Advertising is a form of gambling. Finance is a form of gambling. Loaning is gambling is a form of gambling. Drug dealing is a form of gambling. Prostitution is a form of gambling. But the other direction is baiting into hazard is a form of gambling.
Mm-hmm.
So all this Marxist stuff is a form of gambling. Now you got to ask yourself, where does where does this pattern come from?
Wait. And what is at risk?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really it's an asymmetry.
What risk is the question?
Right.
And it's like, okay, this is where I get to talk about doubling down again. Because Western civilization is based on the organization of violence. And it goes like this. This is my conclusion from last week. When we double down, we double down to this nut, which is like this. The organization of violence is solved through civil means by ballot and through other means by bullet. And it's like this. That's the risk.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you start out
when you're gambling with the Westerner, you're gambling
with violence.
The risk is to be resolved by ballot or by bullet.
Yeah.
That's all. And it's like this, as we started this conversation, 28% of the population thinks it may be necessary to go to bullet. And I think the Marxists are dumb enough that they may, and I will point to the conversation the socialists had with Glenn Beck one more time, in which the socialists presented with the premise, given the fact, undisputable proof that socialism has not worked and cannot work and will not ever work. What do you say to that? To which the socialist replies, well, we have to try. He's a gambler and he's taking his chances, and
he's taking chances with your money, your life, your culture.
He's taking a chances with me, with
that's the same thing.
Resolution by ballot or bullet, and he gets to pick. And it's like he's dumb enough to choose the latter.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's okay. The population is okay with that.
Well, I mean, the problem is that there's a not insignificant part of the population tends to be very quiet. It isn't a talking class.
That's correct.
It's an acting class of people that want to use bullets because they view it as the only means of obtaining justice and restitution for the crimes of the credentialed. So I just
gambling excesses.
Yeah, so I see these. The problem is, those people, they don't. I mean,
Cowboy told me this. The cowboy told me this. He's 85. Cowboy says this. He goes, I don't mind getting shot and I don't mind getting hung because they're both quick. But I don't want to be drowned and I don't want to be burned. And I said, that's very reasonable. And then, and we were talking about Western civilization because he told me this. I told him I was talking about what's really going on in the world. He's like, I just see the surface. Okay. And he says, in Western civilization, you know how they dealt with witches? They drowned them and they burned them. Any questions? That's a cowboy.
All right. So I want to roll this. Do you have anything else to warm up with?
No, I'm.
So how do we? So we went into medicine that it's a very fixable problem, but like somebody used to, I don't like to use these euphemisms, but some of the people have been hypnotized. That's bullshit. They've been baited into hazard, right? By a false promise.
Hoodwinked. They've been hoodwinked.
Right. And it's by a false promise that they want to. And what the purpose of that false promise is to put the people who make false promises, they're credentialed, into power that they cannot demonstrate the competency to obtain by performative means. Well, if they can't obtain that competency by performative means, then it's only by verbal means, not by performative means. How do we know we should let them have power? Right? There's only 3 ways we know of producing, which is demonstrated competency: family, the economy, and the military. Your family, because you generate intergenerational competency; your economy, because you generate organizational competency; and your military, you generate political or defensive competency. Now, so we should put people in power, in the monarchy, the nobility, and if we're going to have one, the government, that have demonstrated competency. Now, there becomes a problem of administration. The problem with administration is called the clerical class. It has happened to us. It happened to China, but we don't think of it as it happened to Rome, where the Christians became the clerical class. In other words, the administrative class. So we certainly don't think of it as the Middle East, where what's the name for Muslim priest?
Mullah.
Where they become the clerical class, right? The administrative class. And so every time a credentialed class has gotten in power, this has happened. So a credentialed class is essentially a hazard. It's a necessary hazard, but it's a hazard. How do you keep that credentialed class from being a hazard? Is you limit it to those people who have demonstrated competency. And those people who you bring in as laborers in the credentialed class have to be taught the methodology, in other words, the rules of the clerical class. We never developed that. We haven't created a law of the administrative class.
They're lawless.
They're lawless. So I hope somebody realizes the innovation I just stated.
That's truly remarkable innovation.
Right, is that you need a law of the clerical class, because they have to be aware of the fact that they don't have demonstrated competency outside of their field. And if they did, they wouldn't want to work in a clerical function. Oh, it's true.
I'm not arguing. I just find it humorous. The statement of it, the factual nature of it is it's just funny.
My attitude is, if you want to work in the government, you need to have been in the military. If you survive military service, then you're
demonstrated that you're capable of working within the bureaucracy.
Yes, right, and that there's rules, and you get fucked if you violate rules. Right. Now, and I mean the military trained, like, my version of the military reform is called the light infantry reform. But it basically says, how we teach Marines? We teach everybody that after they've been through it. And I don't mean like they can be, the Marines are an elite force, right? That's why they're not soldiers, they're Marines. That's just the Army. They're only soldiers. We're fucking Marines. Right. But anyway, the point is that kind of training needs to be given across the spectrum. After that, you survive that, then you can go into other training. But you've got to be able to survive that, because that's what makes you a citizen, not
you're a Robert Heinlein guy.
Well, I mean, Heinlein is just stating the obvious because he's a student of history.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's what makes Europeans Europe is we start out as an army. We don't start out as a peasantry. Right. We don't start out.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is Hanson's basic, right? He's starting from there. All I did is take it back to the steppe and say that's where it comes from.
Go further back.
Well, I just go further back and say this is where this comes from.
Right.
But he's like the West starts with the phalanx, right? The need for the aristocracy to bring in the farmers and to franchise the farmers into the military and create an us. Well, he starts off from this premise that the farmers weren't part of the military order in the first place. Well, they were, but they weren't, this is a different, you've got to be in military service now. You're not just like creating raids, right? This is a government political system now, not an entrepreneurial warfare like the steppe, right?
Right.
So now
so it's like I would to put it in your terms, he would say that was the institutionalization of the Western system is what he's arguing as the beginning of Western civilization. But it's just it comes.
What I'm describing is a group evolutionary strategy and culture.
That's right. That's right.
And what Hansen is describing with the Greeks is its institutionalization, and then the Roman copying of this institutional model.
It's the formalization of it.
Correct.
Yeah, institutionalization of it is all it is. It's yes.
So I said Hanson's right. That's just not that doesn't tell you enough because it doesn't tell you where that concept comes from in the first place.
What informs it?
Yeah. What group strategy makes it so you even come up with a power?
How did you think of that? Right.
Yeah, I mean, think everything comes from somewhere, right? If you right, which is like I try to tell that to people. It's like. Everything comes from somewhere, right? What that really means, people aren't that fucking creative, right? I mean, right? You got to think of it as everything we do is this tiny leap in thinking.
That's right.
So any thought we come up with is just an accumulation of tiny jumps, because that's all we're able to do is make these little associations. So like weird, everything comes from somewhere. And that's why I say group evolutionary strategy is so important, because that's where everything comes from. And that came from some basic circumstance,
accident.
Way the hell back when there was an accident of geography and time and space, right? So, and the order you were stuck with. And so I focus on that. You and I have covered this, and a lot of people say, well, that's just so really good. Yeah, it is, but you get to trace the fact that holy shit, it's almost unalterable.
It's only alterable if you kill all the men.
Yeah.
and it's like that's the old Western way.
Yes, that's
the old uncivil Western way.
So our military order. So get back to it. Like Marines are the Spartan view of the world, right? Which is our original model. We think of Athens as the original model. No, Sparta is the original model.
Yeah, the Spartans.
Athens is what happens when you build an economy, right?
That's when the gamblers start getting in charge, man.
Right. And then Rome is what happens when you make it into an empire. Just like Germany is Sparta, England Navy is Athens, and America Mediterranean, right, and is Rome. It's the same process. Why? Because it's the same fucking group evolutionary strategy, on the steppe, in the Mediterranean, in the continental Atlantic. It's the same fucking process. Why? Because we're fucking Europeans, and we have a couple of sweet bit slips down in there that have said this is how decisions are made.
Right. It's like the base of the decision will start like this: Spartan.
Yeah, that's it, right? It's like in the end, how does a minority, which is what white folks are, how does a minority defeat an inferior but larger numbered majority? OODA loops and expertise makes an OODA loop. Okay, well, what civilization is the most OODA loopy, European, because what does OODA loopy mean? It means innovative and adaptive. And why is innovation adaptation possible? Because a choice and responsibility are pushed down as far as they can, so that every single opportunity that's identified, way down to the sergeant in the field, can seize that opportunity. Well, we don't think of it as, we think of it, well, but sergeant in the field, what's the equivalent? The equivalent is the fucking entrepreneur, craftsman. The craftsman, what's the equivalent of a captain? He's the entrepreneur. What's a colonel? He's a minor politician. What's a general? He's a major politician, right? So what's the difference? Is you Western civilization, we're just an army. The great thing about an army is status is dependent on duty, not rank.
Bing.
Bingo. That's how we create equality, is respect for doing duty regardless of rank. So you respect the private, the corporal, the sergeant, and I'm just using, I can't do all the ranks and all the services because I'm not competent. And
I understand.
Airmen and whatever, so I can't do that. So but I know the military ones are ancient, so we can use them, right? So you just say, well, this all we've done, and you look at Prussia, you say, why did Prussia produce the best bureaucracy? Well, it was just military. Well, we tried to bring that here and make it credentialed instead of military. Does it make sense? We made a priesthood class instead of our military class. And by the end, what they did was use the Vietnam War to discredit the military caste, except that the military caste was right. And who did it? The talking class. They came out of the undermining. They came into the academy. They got their way into the media. They expanded into the education. And 3 generations later, we've got the destruction of our civilization from within. Why? Because what makes us unequal? What makes us unequal is not be putting the commons first, finding our rank, fulfilling our duty at that rank, and getting equal respect because of our demonstrated competency at that rank, not above it or below it, right? And then we have respect from one another, regardless of rank, in other words, social class. Right? It's really common among Western men to respect the journeyman or the craftsman or the laborer. Why? Because we're thinking military, we're not thinking social. Social means he's below me, right?
Status, yeah.
Status. Military, he has a different job from me.
Right. So
his responsibilities are actually narrow. You don't find a colonel, carving stone. You find a private carving stone, right? I mean, who built the fucking walls at, Adrian's Wall, right? And all that shit. Why? Because the soldiers were engineers, right? They didn't fight as much as they were engineering and administrating and regulating, right? You don't find it, but you expect that private to do his job as a stonecutter, and he's due respect. He's not a serf. He's not just a freeman. He's not a serf. He's not a slave. He's not a barbarian. He's a citizen soldier. Those 2 words are the same. We just don't think of it that way anymore, but that's what citizen means. You're a soldier. So people say, well, and whenever I tell people this, and I walk them through it, of course it's obvious, but the answer is, I don't want that responsibility. Fine, then you may not have any say.
That's right.
You can have juridical defense under the common law, but if you're not willing to carry the responsibility, so what is the responsibility from a barbarian, a slave, a serf, a freeman, a citizen, and a sovereign? What's the difference? They're just ranks of responsibility. What responsibility have you demonstrated competency for? What's the difference between a private, a sergeant, a corporal, a sergeant, a captain, lieutenant, a captain, a colonel, and the different generals, right?
Right.
Those are the only ones I use. I know there's more in there.
There's lots of them.
All right.
That's
So,
okay.
because they're just, but the point is, those are classes of responsibility. Well, what do you think? Citizen, sovereign, sovereign citizen, freeman, serf, slave, and barbarian are. Well, a barbarian has no responsibilities. A slave has those responsibilities that he is given, but he cannot. He has very little accountability. A serf has mixed accountability. A freeman has full self accountability. A citizen is accountable to others in the polity. A sovereign is accountable to other sovereigns in the polity. It's just a military. So if we don't train people to be in the military, the militia, a very able-bodied man, I mean all citizens are all, then we don't have the class structure, the tolerance for class differences that creates high trust society that other societies don't have, because they become social status rather than demonstrated status. The great thing is social status is always someone's opinion, but economic status and military status, that's just demonstrated competency. And same thing for families. If you can't keep a family together, if you can't get married, you can't keep a family together, you can't keep children in a family together, if you can't create a self-sustaining family, if you can't create a self-sustaining extended family, if you can't create an intergenerational self-sustaining family, that's just a set of ranks. So we have military, economic, and familial, and the only bad one is social, right? Because it's easy, because it's feminine, it's not demonstrated.
Yes.
So the problem is social and credentialed are the same. They're by approval. They're not by competency, demonstrated competency. Competency in gaining approval can be anything from corruption.
That's right.
To sexual favors. And I'm going to throw in there the various kinds of gambling we call baiting into hazard. Are they really approvals or are they harms? Right. So seductions. So I'm going to say, okay, well, I want to technically social status should be, I want to imitate you. The question is, why do you want to be imitated? So do you want to be imitated because your family has achieved nobility? Do you want to be because you have achieved demonstrated competency in a field? Do you want to have a demonstrated competency in economic organization of people? Do you want to have demonstrated competency in the military? If you haven't demonstrated the competency in one of those fields, then why the fuck do you have any say about what's going on in the polity?
No, we understand one another, Kurt. That question remains unanswered.
Well, so what you get is you get the philosophical, the ideological, the theological, and the utopian. Right. So that's what you get.
Idealistic thinking, I regard it as what's interesting is this, because I ran into the patient last week, that was socially motivated, and he was misbehaving towards the staff because he perceived himself to be socially superior. So he gets to misbehave towards the staff because he doesn't have to respect them because they're inferior socially. And he was guilty of idealistic thinking because he doesn't understand how the world is actually put together, and he wants it to behave in a manner that is ideal. And so I had to have words with him in rebuke of his misbehavior.
So here's an interest. This is a great subject. So let's take your example and then let's use a counter example, right? Because your example is correct. I might go into a store, right, where I'm not going to name it. I shop when I was an entrepreneur and worried about such things, I shopped at a very fancy store. Right? And when I go into that store, I expect to be treated according to my station.
Yes.
Right. When I go into another fancy store, I'm thinking of an electronics store, I expect to be treated as is my station. These are questions of manners.
That's right.
They're just questions of manners.
Yes.
Well, and here, what a station means is I'm going to use exceptional manners and
Yeah.
I expect them in return.
Seems very reasonable.
That's all that means. Now, there are places where I go where it's not about manners, right? It's about manners are a necessary function, but that's all that's happening. You don't get preferential treatment. You just get appropriate manners.
That's right.
Right. And so let's say I go to your office and if I was treated with ill manners, I would say something like, I'm a gentleman and I treat you
That's
as
correct.
gentlemen treat you.
That's
And
very reasonable.
right. And I expect to be treated as a gentleman in return. That when that happens, if it's said like that, it usually what's happened is the person has a secondary set of thoughts, and that's what's in their head, and they're externalizing them through your head. All you're doing when you say that is you're reminding them that it's me you're talking to, not whatever else is in your head.
That's right.
That's all that's happened. Now, when was in a courtroom, I have said, to great horror of the court in the past, I'm a gentleman, a man of achievement, and a non-trivial student of the law. I expect to be treated as such in this court, which oddly enough is basically the same thing as
That's
saying
right.
I'm a gentleman, right? I'm acting as toward you as a gentleman. And it just makes the other people aware that you're
Noticing them,
noticing them,
putting
and
them on notice. It's
notice, right? Uh, and if the thing about that statement is there's no escape from it,
no.
right? You can't get out of it, right? Right? So in the courtroom, I was correct. In the business, I was correct, right? But I'm not asking for anything but manners.
That's right.
I'm not asking for a priority, a deference,
No, it's
a
like
privilege.
right. So what this fellow was, he was expressing frustration at my inability to cause the machine to react in a manner that was conducive of the other people paying.
Right. And what you say
that which he wanted them to. I told him you're misbehaving, and it was a firm review, because like, you are misbehaving and you need to mind your frustrations and take them out in a different fashion.
yes. Well,
That's
so
all.
the problem is you've now said that, but you have to give him the reason,
I
which
told
is
him.
okay.
I explained it to him.
I know that, but the audience
Oh, so I
didn't
explained
know
to him
that.
the system is designed in a way that you are not taking into account by your behavior.
Right. So I don't get to make this choice, right? I'm just
No,
doing.
it has nothing to do with me.
It has nothing to do with me.
I'm
I
trying to
don't make
operate
this
the
choice.
wheels, and the wheels are not.
And you know what? You have a greater ability to influence this than I do as a doctor. Right?
And wait, this is what was really funny. He wanted the name of the administrator. You wanted to talk to the administrator. He says, "Don't you have an administrator?" I said, "I do." I said, "These wheels are not his to turn either. What I'll give you is I will contact the administrator."
But that's the right answer. That actually is the right answer, because the person will go off on the journey. And if it's like, if I have an unhappy customer, I mean, I always give this example, right? It's like, if this guy worked, one of my partners, Steve Salta, if you have a problem with Steve Salta, you're the problem. I know this because he will do
no other way it can be.
He will do anything humanly possible to make you happy. Right?
That's nice.
So if Steve comes to me and says, I need help with a customer, I know a couple of things. One is I have to go take the blame, right? Because Steve actually was, and I have to find out how the customer's at fault. I have to, right? That's what I have to do. The customer's definitely at fault. How he perceives it as being Steve's fault, and how I can take the blame.
not the washer.
because then the customer's happy,
That's right. That's
and
a
the relationship
Ooda
is,
loop is closed, right?
and then and it's usually involves something like, tell you what, I'll give you 10% off on this for this mistake, or just we'll make this minor change, whatever. They don't care. What they want to know is they're listened to and respected.
That's right.
Right. Then you get the asshole that comes in there trying to screw with you on price. Well, we knew it should do it. I'm like, I just tell them the truth. I don't play that game. We're the best there is. There's a reason we're the best there is. Right. And there's a reason we're more expensive. And that's because we're the best there is. And if you want the best there is, that's what you got. Right. That's fucking strangely enough.
Yep.
And the reason, frankly, the reason we're more expensive is if we're always within 2%. Nobody else in the industry does that, and we have the highest respect in the industry, highest customer service rating in the industry. Why? Because if you're not happy, this guy Steve, he will make sure you're happy, and if he can't make you happy, he will make sure I make you happy, right? So that's why we're what we're good at. So if you're not happy in this case, as long as it's fair, and as long as we're responsible, I'll make it my responsibility, because that's what he really wants, is then I'll give you something and you feel right and just and listen to. Turns out that the customer you say that to is 10 times as loyal as the customer you never made a mistake with. Why? Because he knows.
He has demonstrated it.
You demonstrate it. So, you pay for a guy. There's a difference between paying for a guy like me, right?
Right.
And paying for JetCap Gemini or Avanade, because we'll do that. Right. And then you get other guys who won't. They're nickel and dimers. And the nickel and dimers look cheaper when you start, but they're not.
You'll figure that out too. It will be demonstrated.
Well, it's like the tech company that got the Obamacare thing. I mean, that was a joke. The Obamacare thing. There's 2 companies on Earth that could have solved that, and they chose some group that was an internal political favor, right? And I'm like, the government made a choice. That's why
they choose the winners is just right. Goofy.
Another one is, I'm sorry if I can just throw this stuff out there, is the IRS can't upgrade from COBOL, right? And part of this is humorous to me. Part of it is because there is no. This is one of the biggest money losing software projects in history, right? It's the biggest failures in history. Right? But the reason is that there's the way those old systems work is a lot more like you going through a list.
Yeah.
Right. It's not so much a relational database problem as it's like grunt work. Right.
Yeah.
So the way that the problem is, nobody's invented a modern version of that technology in a modern language to do the same thing. That kind of processing needs to be at that kind of scale. And it's like, you can't even have that you can't have that discussion. In other words, there's nobody in the government you can have the discussion with. There are too few people out here in the world who can have a discussion with. And there's no company that knows how to make money at it, except IBM, who would have to make a new set of technologies in order to do it, to compensate for it. I mean, it's that kind of issue. And so the reason is that there's just like 9,000 exceptions to everything. Right. And so it's a very complicated thing. So that's why you get problems when people go into this fucking archaic piece of exception handling code, and some idiot in the government comes up and you're actually tasked with. And the truth is, that's the reason the IRS is irresponsible. Because it's because it's actually,
they can't be responsible.
They can't be.
It's not possible to make them be responsible.
My neighbor used to be a honcho at one of the tax processing companies. And I've interviewed him a whole bunch of times on this issue. This is a very good Christian man, right? I mean, he donates in his retirement from his wheelchair.
Nice.
He donates his time to do tax filings for people who can't afford to. This is what
quite a man.
no, and his wife was recently deceased, and a friend of mine, and she is an equal saint.
Right.
I wish we knew how to produce those people anymore, but you can't without the Catholic Church, as far as I can tell. So, in any event, this is a good man. I've interviewed him. So he doesn't have any, he never goes to like what I would do or you would do, which is make some pessimistic statement about the nature of man, right? He's always got this optimistic look, can do. He's adorable. I love him, right? And
his forgiveness is quite seemingly inexhaustible.
it's amazing. And his Christian forgiveness is out there. He doesn't even come up with it. He doesn't even think a negative thing. He's like, well, they're just people. So the thing is, what I learned from him is that you actually have to be a human to do it, because the permutations of things are too
complex.
Too complex. And so, of course, this is the
I think, yeah, I'm not going to deviate the course of the conversation.
So the point being that, you know, these
complex.
problems are like the IRS problem is solvable, like the medical system problem is solvable, but they're not solvable as little changes. They're solvable as you create this entirely new organization, right, that can do it all over again outside of this organization.
That's right.
The way you do this in my business is you acquire some company that's actually good at something, and then you take your company and make it change to fit that one.
That's how you do it. Okay, that makes sense.
Because the internal resistance,
yes,
is too high to both know what the solution is and change to it, because most organizations are built of political alliances, and that's what you're actually trying to overcome, is all the changes in status and relation that occur when that happens. So what you do is you have to create a competitor.
Yes.
I learned this from Gates. Gates would do this great thing of, he would, and I was involved in one of these. He would give 3 different groups the same mission.
Okay.
And whoever won, the won, right, got the funding.
Okay.
And this is the same thing you do what I did in acquisitions. Is I would just like, okay, what are we not good at? I'll go acquire a company. They'll show us how it's done, and then people will migrate to it. That's different from trying to bait people into it, because it just
that's an interesting strategy.
Internal organizational adaptation without adversarial competition is extremely difficult. It's why you can't fix Twitter or Facebook, is you have to actually create a competing organization, or you have to acquire one, or you have to create an outside competitor. For example, what Microsoft did when everything was failing at Microsoft, the guys who started Xbox said, we're only going to do it if it's outside the rest of the company, because you guys fucking kill everything. Now, I can't tell you how much money I've lost because Microsoft kills everything. Because, that's my job, right? Is to advance, my company's job is to advance Microsoft technologies back in the day.
Yeah.
And so they would go buy some company. I would go buy the companies that were great at implementing that thing. And I would, and then Microsoft would decide how to ruin this particular technology, and then I would be stuck out, whatever the acquisition costs and the whatever. And usually the decisions were really bad and really obvious. But the one thing about the elephant is that it keeps going. So,
That's right.
And then sometimes they listen to you. Like I knew where was going with their CRM product. So I went out and bought the company that originally wrote the CRM product. And then, because the guys had left, and then they were having problem with the e-commerce product. So I went out and bought the guys who wrote the e-commerce product. So they're like, I'll help you fix what you fuck up, right? Can't do right. And, they're going to think that I'm being an asshole by saying this. And of course, I'm exaggerating it slightly for entertainment value, but there's quite a bit of truth in it. And so you go find you realize that Microsoft, it's like, they were the smartphone that worked. I had one, right? It was great. It worked perfectly. How do you fuck that up? Microsoft can fuck anything up. And they fuck it up for the same credentialed reason. is that you have too many cooks in a pot. When what you want to do is do what they did with, they want to do, it's called synergy. If you ever hear a business person say, I want a synergistic relation between these products or between our brand, you fire that person. And you take the, and
It's a poison letter.
if not, what you say is you say, I want to take this, I'm going to take this product outside the company. This is why Americans are so good at off-book R&D, is the small companies do the innovation and the big companies acquire it once it's already been successful, right? Because the small company hasn't got enough capital.
That's right.
To reach the market. So really most big companies are basically marketing. Microsoft is marketing firms. And most R&D happens in small entrepreneurial companies. And we're so good at that this is the brain drain from Europe to America. Is that the whole point in European venture capital is how quickly can you get to America? Right. So anybody who does anything right in Europe flees here. Well, why does that happen when Europe was the source of innovation for 500 years?
I don't have the answer to that.
Well,
but they don't have this system. It's synergy got them.
They stopped being German, and we didn't. That's the answer.
There we go. It's like a OODA loopy thing. I like this OODA loopy construction in your mind there. It's like it has to do with rate of processing information.
Yes,
it's
the rate of adaptation. You can think of processing information as adaptive speed.
Yeah,
and you can, but what I think we are trying to communicate to the audience, and I am by the via negativa and the falsification and everything else I do, is say you can't make humans work faster. You can only remove impediments to their work and their cognition and their cooperation, and those things come by create knowledge that is closer to the laws of the universe, create law that removes falsehood and irreciprocity, and create institutions that facilitate markets or discover reciprocal change. This is opposite from what all the rest of humanity does, which is what they do is try to tell people how to be successful instead of tell people how they may not be unsuccessful. And it's so retrospect, it's so frustratingly simple.
Yeah.
So that's the secret of the West. Is the way is any way that isn't wrong, false, or reciprocal.
Right.
And your status is from demonstrated ability to produce a common good, which is a market good, by your discovery, seizure, and distribution of an opportunity. Whereas everybody else tries to say, here's how you do it, and you will be happy. Well, here's how you do it. And here's how you will be deprived of the interest, will, and opportunity to create opportunities for innovation, discovery, innovation, adaptation.
It's interesting because
and prosperity.
One of the gentlemen I saw yesterday he's in a VA nurse, and he's having a problem with the VA system. So he's trying to. I know, right? Hard to believe. But he talked about supervisors that their personality changed as they accepted the role. And it's like this. Why did they do that? It's because they adapted their personality to the identity of the supervisor to conform to the demands of their supervisories, higher supervisors. And so they turn into a different person because they are conforming to the identity that they are expected to conform to.
Right. So what's the alternative we discussed last week? You can have a hierarchy that will eventually calcify, or you can produce war games. In other words, that keep you dynamic. And so, of course, I'm a advocate of the latter, which is you can create an external market which falsifies you, or you can create an internal market that tries to falsify you. In other words, baits you into hazard.
Yeah.
And so what we like is the former, because it's less fearful and conflict oriented.
Yes.
In other words, less adaptive. Well, what happens though is that having people the equivalent of secret shoppers, or what do they call it when the police do it?
It's undercover, man.
Yeah, but what's it called? It's called well, it's under the category of creating a hazard. So
Oh, entrapment.
Entrapment. You use entrapment to try to pull people out, right? Now, entrapment is a bait. Now, and the way the military does it is by direct competition, intentional competition. So you can do it secretively as a bait,
Yeah.
and you can do it functionally, which is you can try to get things through that shouldn't be, right?
Right.
Try to break the organization, or you can war against that organization and subject it to competition. These are just individual, departmental, and overall means of competition. You try to bait an individual, you try to overwhelm a process, and you try to falsify a process, and you try to compete against the organization. Now, if you treat this as a game, right, then it's not so bad, right? In other words, it's like internal affairs at the police gets a little out of hand sometimes, right? Right. The point is you have to be forgiven. In other words, the point isn't to punish you. The point is to identify weaknesses.
That's right. So it's gamey as opposed to high stakes.
Right. And so the point here is to produce the game. Like if you do find people who commit crimes, right, who commit outright crimes, but most of the time you identify stupidity or laxity or procedural.
Well, it's like this. It's like that. If you bait the guy to taking a bribe, for instance, right? And then you just say, don't be naughty. That guy learns that sometimes the guy's trying to bribe you is going to be the guy going to get you.
Right.
And that's good enough.
It's one thing that, it's also different between getting a bribe and doing something that's against the interest of the customer or the institution, whatever. Right?
No, right. So actually harmful.
Right. I learned a lot about bribery living in Ukraine and working in Russia. It's just a cost of doing business, which is how most of the world sees it. Right. It's just, the guy only gets paid $80 a month, and the bribe is how you get his attention.
Right.
To work on your problem instead of someone else's. Right. That's turns out to be a pretty good way of doing things. I don't want to advocate for it, but I'm just surprised at how effectively it works. If you understand how the Chinese government works, that it's essentially that. It's that
it works. It works.
It does work. The problem is that in the case of like Ukraine, in policemen, it's noise level. It's okay. Like some fucking Ukrainian politician tried to get out with a couple million in cash and got caught trying to cross the border yesterday.
Yeah.
That wasn't earned because it was a mixture of euros and dollars. There's just no way that was earned income, right? So, that happens. Well, there's no way. Look at the scale of oligarch is the wrong term, but the Russian insiders, right? The rich Russians that are part of the government. These people just deprive the citizenry of billions. It's criminal as hell, right?
Well,
So
right, yeah, so it's like I look at the credentialism in the West, and specifically in the
it's the
United States,
same.
it's bribery on an ongoing basis to twist your behavior to do things that are essentially not ethical on an ongoing basis. Or you can go live in the street.
Well, I mean, that's what credentialism is, right? I mean, it's similar to the anyway.
I apologize.
I lost my train.
Bribery. You were talking about the oligarchy types. That's all right.
Well, anyway, I don't remember what I was trying to make a chain of reasoning, and
Well, my apologies for interrupting you.
that's okay. I've lost it. I suppose if I rewound the video at some point, I could get it.
It's not essential to do so unless you would prefer to do so.
Well, I mean, it's just I don't want to leave I hate it when I leave
The
these
audience
videos,
hanging
so I
there.
don't-
You were talking about bribery and the effectiveness of it to get people's attention.
Yeah, and then I talked about the American versus the Chinese system. And before that, what was the point of? In other words, I made the point that bribery does work, despite the fact that I don't like it to work. I said that as an adjunct for whatever conversation I'm in that I feel kind of stupid that I can't bring back up.
My apologies for having interrupted you again.
That's the problem with long chains of reasoning. Like, if you deviate a little bit, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, what the fuck chain of reasoning did I have? Because I
It's
started thinking
sensitive.
about, why did I start thinking about, what is it called? Corruption, because I went down another chain.
War games. You were on war games.
Okay, that's it. So thank you. So the point here is that you can create these games that aren't necessarily to try to find criminals. They're to break your system and test whether it's fulfilling its primary function or not. Right. And so this is the equivalent of market competition, right? Through systemic falsification. Would most of us prefer that bureaucracies were set up as competing institutions? Well, they'll just conspire to do the same thing. Right. In other words, all bureaucracies, even if they're divided, would form cartels, which is what we've got in our government, is a cartel. So why don't the way you do it, of course, is you create a special branch whose job it is to go in. Now, the negative version of this is the Stasi in Germany. What's the one in Russia, in the Soviets?
KGB.
The KGB. Right. And the difference is they're trying to manage you. They're not trying to break your system procedurally, right? They're trying to test for ideological conformity, which is again part of the social function, not part of the familial, economic, or military function.
Right.
So we're trying to test operational. That's all. We don't care what you think. I don't care what you do. So this goes from the military, et cetera, on up. This is the whole thing of we're a military. That's why it works. That's why the respect system works. And that's why the high trust system works. That's why rule of law originated. Our whole system is based on this one idea that happened 5,000 years ago completely by accident. And it turns out to produce the greatest correspondence to the universe because it's the most adaptive. Why? Because it facilitates the most OODA loops, right, over the shortest period of time with the least friction. And I'm trying to make the point that the way you take advantage of this is not by you can do it two ways, by the military method. If it's relatively simple, militaries do simple things, right?
They do.
Right. But if it's a complex method and you need professionals, you just in other words, you need credentials, specialists.
Yes.
Then you need to have some mixture of administrators, the military, and experts, which is technicians. And these technicians' job is to go out and do whatever it is they do. And then you have the ex-military, which is what you want, somebody competent in charge, right? So that they're not deviating from duty and plan. And so then you just falsify these things through either markets, if they're possible. In other words, you privatize it, or if you can't privatize it, which is because it's often difficult to do that. There's no means of producing a profit, right?
Right.
There's no, right. Then what you do is you subject it to war games. And the way you subject things to war games is you just make it a criteria. Wargaming is the way in which young people get into the business, right? Which is pretty effective because you're trying to teach them what the job is and what it is. So I mean, these are two disciplines. So in other words, we invest heavily in credentialism that has no that is totally divorced from human behavior.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to say is we should produce credentialism that is the result of of dealing with human behavior.
Yeah.
All right. Blah, blah, blah. And why? It's really cheap to have people sit in rooms and listen to somebody pontificate. And apprenticeships are harder. And so what I'm really saying is apprenticeships are apprenticeships, and almost everything needs to be an expensive premise. And would you rather pay $100,000 to send somebody to college to get indoctrinated into stuff that has actually no value or is actually anti-value? Or would you rather spend $100,000 in subsidizing an apprenticeship for people to actually learn the craft?
It's a hard
It's
one.
an
Isn't
easy
it?
thing to say, right? And so I don't want to fund this corrupt academy. I mean, there's really very few things you need to go to college for. Right. I mean, there's mathematics is obviously right. Mathematics, physics is obviously medical research, biological research is obviously certainly petroleum, and I would actually argue computer science or anything that's basically calculation. Economics doesn't hurt either as long as you're in economic research. But most of those things, that's about it. Everything else is either entertainment or apprenticeship. Excuse me, I forgot to add the natural law. So
Right.
I forgot to add you need to go to school for law. These are all forms of calculation. Aside from that, the rest of it's just apprenticeship. And
Right.
I would rather if you told me I want the state to pay for my apprenticeship or my education, which one do you think I'm going to choose? I would choose that I'd rather if you're going to have the state pay for anything, let's subsidize your apprenticeship. Because then I'm subsidizing your ability to get in the workforce, make money, learn about people, instead of spend 4 years partying, fucking, and learning propaganda. This is called operationalism. It's very different from pontificationism. And unfortunately, the other uses the credentialists use pontificationism, which is most of which is about subject matters that are insulated from feedback loops.
So it's like there's a link here that's quite interesting to me, which is social constructionism and credentialism. These are related. They're like two sides of the coin.
Correct.
Pontification is the substance of it.
And social construction and credential.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to say that this is really interesting. I had a topic for today.
Yes.
And if you took social construction and credentialism versus what? Versus
it's calculation and operation and demonstration.
Demonstrated competency. So it's empiricism,
Yeah.
right? That's the same. That's the same as empathizing versus systematizing, which is the same as feminine versus masculine.
Yes.
Oh God, it's so frustrating.
What?
Well, because the underlying logic for everything humans do, now that we do know it and can know it, which is what you and I are talking about here, it means that most of what we deal with in the universe is nonsense.
It's not organized, right? It's chaos, right?
Well, you know, it's easy for scientists to make fun about theologians talking about angels on the head of a pin or some other goddamn ridiculous
Right.
theological concept, right? You know, the reason the flower looks like this is God was thinking. What I mean, geez, you know how much stuff it's written about that? There's no fucking difference.
No.
We've just reframed the conversation as a new sort of social construction.
It's entertainment.
Yeah. It's fucking evil.
I think that's not far. It's not far. It's not becoming. It's not evolving. It's not a. It's overgrowth, like cancer is. It lacks the via negativa.
Oh, so frustrating.
What's
Well,
frustrating?
Well, that you know what we talk. It's like this is the problem. I come back to the problem I have with triangles.
Okay.
It's so true.
The problem with triangles, please elucidate.
It's a necessary. It's like the thing that ends up being the tool that's misapplied.
Okay.
Like all we're saying is that there's an equal sign, right? That there's an equilibrium, right? So you have two scales, right? Male and female,
Okay. Right.
right? Right. And the thing is, we can't see the scales. All we see is the top,
That's right.
right? We can't see this. We only see this moving between it. And then the returns on it are just the height
Okay.
at the top of the pyramid. So the problem I have is that every time I talk about triangles, 11 idiots run away with some attempt of fitting. They're just trying to make a triangle fit what they think, instead of saying the triangle is just a pattern that we see across the hierarchy. But no matter what you talk about, whether it's positive, negative and positive charges in the physical universe, or this molecule and that molecule, or sexes,
Right.
or male and female, it's just evolutionary computation.
Right.
The divergence and height of which determines the capture of energy and which direction that energy is held over time. I mean, so you know, that's a concept that is important to understand as a concept. But you know, when you start thinking about it, as you start dividing the world into just the masculine and female means of doing things, which is just empathizing versus systematizing, or feels versus reals, or inconsistent and consistent, or whatever. Everything is expressible. Every single thing that we talk about is expressible as the conflict between male long-term political capitalizing and female short-term hyperconsumptive, right? I mean, that's it.
Right.
And
So it's suppressing itself at every level.
everything. female versus male, feminine versus masculine, feels versus reals, empathizing versus systematizing, which is the technical version of it, social construction and credentialism versus empiricism and demonstrated competency, positiva versus negativa, wants versus limits. It's the same shit no matter what we do. Now, the thing is, the universe needs that to occur for computation to occur. Otherwise, there's no means of
You
falsification.
have to count the sum or the equilibrium, right? Which is
Is what
interesting
survives.
terminology. This sum being the Latin word for I am. Because it's the identity which survives, right?
Well, I mean, that's the whole point is people, it's like, it's when I talk about consciousness is actually stupidly simple. And we need to fire all these philosophers and stop teaching this nonsense, right? Is that how is the body supposed to figure out how to represent the universe? Well, there's no recipe.
It just does it or
It
it
figures it
fails.
out or it doesn't. And it figures it out by sorting. That's all.
It's just frequencies.
It just sorts it. And the only way to make it work is when it sorts the way it corresponds to the universe. I mean, it's really that simple. And so you evolve from into sight to sound to touch to systemic to equal, and that's it. Well, it's the same thing for the whole universe. If it doesn't have a difference, it can't compute a persistence, right? I mean, it's so simple. And so the sex differences are necessary means of providing a computation because there's nothing else to test. We can only internally test. You can only create an equilibrium between a test of the two things.
That's right.
Well, without sexes having different opinions, how do you test anything for persistence over time? How does the universe calculate? Well, the problem is that when we don't understand that we're just calculating and it's this field of exchanges that are equal signs. Right. And so it's just a field of possibilities that we're always discovering. So this chick is out here with her short-term solipsistic whatever, and this chick is here with her rational conservative, well, I've just got to raise a family and whatever. And this guy is here, I want to be a dad. And there's gus of weirdos out at the extremes. They're like, I'm trying to solve this intergenerational problem of economic computation. Right? There's just boom, this whole
right.
spectrum of things, and we just try to create a continuously adaptive network of perception, cognition, advocacy, negotiation, exchange, and capitalization or consumption. We just try to create this in this vast network that's constantly recomputing itself in response to the stimuli. And if you look at human beings as an organism, like we look at a body as an organism, it's just the same shit going on, right? And cells are communicating and cooperating with what's next to them, and together they form groups, which we call organs. And organs develop, means of transport between them, and together it persists. But I mean, the fact that
it generates an equilibrium, right?
Correct.
It doesn't. It doesn't.
No cell is better off than it can be without creating cancer, right? It's you think of it as a Nash equilibrium, or in a Pareto distribution. That's the same thing as with here, is that everybody gets the best they can, and we're just dividing this computation up. But I think the humiliating thing, is that when you just reduce it to thank you. Simon Baron Cohen, for empathizing versus systematizing. That's just it. Those two words tell you the difference between the sexes, and everything's a derivation between temporal empathizing and intertemporal sympathizing, and that's it. Temporal empathizing and intertemporal systematizing. I almost did it twice in a row. Jesus. So when you look at it in that perspective, it's so humiliating. It's like as a child, you believe, you believe the tooth fairy and Santa Claus, right? And then when you get told, you're like, you fuckers fooled me for all that long.
I know. I want you to know I didn't do that to my kids, and I feel bad even.
Yes.
that I didn't do it, and I'm like, oh, you can't win.
You can't win. But the point is that when you realize it's just empathizing versus systematizing, they're women, they do that, they're men and they do that. And what we're doing is we're each individually searching for individual male and female fulfillment on those two timelines. And the whole point is, can we construct a trade? Because a trade is an identification of a means for persistence. It's like, if you can't get married and have kids and produce kids, you haven't found an equal sign. That means you're going to fail, which is what's happening, right? It's population collapse. So I'm just sitting here looking, it's just like everything is reducible to empathizing versus systematizing. And it's fucking annoying. It's like discovering that there is no Santa Claus, there's no tooth fairy, there's no Easter bunny. The angels aren't going to come down and sing to me, right? I mean, it's finding out that's what's humiliating, is the fact that we believe all this, we have all these stories, all this nonsense, all this comforting crap, when in the end, it's just males and females exist to distribute the temporal problem of computation, because a thing must be internally computational.
You're mad
because there's no external model.
You mad that because the ruffles are gone?
Yeah,
the frills. It's just like
exactly.
That's it. I get it.
I get to be aesthetically displeased,
Yes, that's fair. That's entirely
reasonable. It's like to say otherwise. Like, people ask, well, I don't have a problem with believing in God as I believe in God, right, and being a scientist, because absolutely I just make the choice. It's like I like a certain art form. Okay, I like a certain set of plays. I like this. Right. It doesn't.
Preference, right? It's a preference.
It's a preference. I don't claim it's a truth. I claim it's a preference and a good.
Right. You can like people who act like there's the Easter bunny around their kids, right?
Yes.
And that's okay, right?
That's okay.
That's right.
So I mean,
and you can prefer that, in fact.
No, what it means is that it's like, Kurt, you take all the emotion out of everything. Well, I do that because I'm taking all the margin. I'm taking all the subjectivity out of it, right? I'm just looking for
intersubjective objectivity.
Yes, I'm just looking for that. That doesn't mean I don't find girls really awesome, yummy, and that I don't, and that I don't appreciate the arts as much or more so than far more probably than most people, or that I don't enjoy silly conversation or trash talk between guys, because that's being human. And that's the experience of being human.
Right.
Right. The experience isn't of no value. It just is experience versus it's objectively true. I prefer to live in a world where girls are pretty and innocent and playful, and guys are playing the romantic 14th century game of, invented by the Italian troubadours and then illustrated by the French, the English, and turned into this whole romantic crap we've got with. Then the church gets on board with its chivalry, etc. I mean, this is all a dance, but it's a beautiful little dance. We've created a game to solve the problem of the fact that, you've got to create families somehow that are to transfer.
That's how you do it. This is how we advance civilization.
Right. And so why do we have all their institutions? Why do we have institutions of education, of religion, of economy, of polity, of law, of banking and finance, of contract and trade? Why do we have norms, traditions, and values? It's to make the dance. It's to reduce, it's to make the
dance. It's hard enough to do it. It's hard enough to do it, and it takes the sting out of it.
Right, because what it is actually, like I said, if you want to know the word of God, it's evolved, and it's not a nice word because it ends with or else.
It's the part not spoken. That's what the guys talk about it as. The part that's not spoken.
Well, it's sort of like the Americans. I don't know why. I've been on this kick lately of saying, why don't we just tell the world what we're doing instead of promoting democracy? It's like we, in the post-war order, we set up this in order to do this because we want to prevent another world war. The way we do this is this. This will lead to a universe of federations between people who have highly advanced economies, slowly replacing the old world agrarian systems as they mature from empires into localized states. Right? This is what we're doing. We did this because we did this in order to prevent world wars, because empires have no value except war. That the only thing they can do, China, is concentrate sufficient capital to produce war. You can either produce policing and justice, which is what we do, or you can produce war of conquest and oppression, which is what they do. Right? So federations can't produce oppression, empires can. Because it takes alliances to do that, because it's a market for the production of polities only unified by defense.
I'll tell you why we have not expressed that in articulated form.
Why not?
Because the empire has conquered us, and the imperials wish to wage war to conquer.
Well, I mean, that's wrong. I say that the new church has conquered us.
Okay, that's what I mean. That's the empire. The new church is the empire.
Well, I don't want it to say that.
Okay, I want to hear what you want to say. You're getting more coffee, are you?
Yes, I am. Is that okay? You want to?
Oh yeah, no, let's do it. Let's just make a new video.
Wait, I want to come. Okay, wait.
No, well,
why can't we finish this topic first?
Okay, well, I'll cook some more
I
coffee.
have a topic for the next video.
Shall I stop the recording?
No, just give me 2 seconds. It's 10 ounces of liquid.
I understand.
So keep talking. We were talking about the difference between
the people that have taken over, the credentialists, are operating the United States and Europe as an imperial venture.
That is incorrect. That's an analogy, they're operating as a religion in the same way religions formed an opposition to the aristocracy in previous eras. This new religion is forming an opposition to the aristocracy in the present era, because that's what religions do. They're opposition movements. In other words, that's what organized religions are. An organized religion uses the bottom against the middle or top. And so that's what's happening, is they've created a religion. And so this is the same thing as Buddhism or Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or let's put it the best.
We're in agreement. We're in agreement. But I'm
right. So an empire is a state, is a state that uses force, and a religion is a non-state order that uses baiting, seduction. And a federation uses trades. So you have religion, empire, and federation. So you are correct in stating that we are being conquered, but we're being conquered by a new globalist religion that is a derivation of the old globalist religion. Mm-hmm. Right? And what is the purpose of a non-territorial religion? Right? It's to form an opposition to the state. When this results in Christianity versus Arianism mediated by rule of law of natural law, you have yumminess that results called trifunctionalism. But when you get it in China, you get Confucianism, right? Which is the bureaucratic, the Confucian bureaucracy, as a mediator of the state, but you don't end up with law like we have, natural law of reciprocity, and you don't end up with religion. You end up with sort of monopoly. The same thing that happened in the Middle East, they ended up with a very powerful religion against the aristocracies that were unable to form. This is important. They were unable to form aristocracy in the Arab world, and they created a raiding militia instead, just like the charioteers of our ancestors did on the steppe, or the horsemen of the steppe did later on. And they were able to use the vast underclasses of the Middle East to overwhelm the Egyptian, the fragmented aristocracies, especially once the Romans and the Persians had exhausted themselves through warfare. So what you end up with is a religion of undermining with nobody left to undermine. So it becomes expansionist. The same thing with Christianity. It was a religion of undermining of the Western Roman Empire by its, when it was adopted by the Eastern Roman Empire, because the Eastern Roman Empire was making its money from the Middle East, not its money from Europe. So it wanted to accommodate those people who were there. What they did, unfortunately, was create the the Council of Nicaea, which turned it into law, which was a law that was for Europeans, but which was intolerable for the tribal Muslims who wanted something more suitable to their traditions. And so they developed Islam as a reformation. That's why they think of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as a sequence of religions, with Islam as the final state. It's why we think of as Christianity as a merger of Hellenic and Egyptian with Semitic and Mesopotamian, as a religion of managing peasants and European, but we Germanized it so because they were not able to produce. The church was never able to get enough power to replace the aristocracies, because the aristocracies in Europe actually existed, where the aristocracies in the Middle East didn't. In other words, it was always too tribal. We were never able to produce kinship relations. It's too diverse. China is, of course, we've been over China. So all these things make a lot of sense in their inner, but I want to distinguish between state empire and we don't have a word, do we, for religion that is the equivalent. We don't have a word or in other words, there's an empire is what you, I guess it's organized religion. Yeah, we use the word organized religion as if institutionalized religion, or organized religion, as the equivalent of empire, because what basically happened is each race developed its own civilization with its own religion. And that really turned out to be Hinduism. They used European. I'm going to use Thomism because I just like where you took me with that. Thomism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, and each race basically got its own religion. The outlier, the odd one being Islam, which is, of course, the most seductive because it's the easiest and most complete. It's the least. If we took and finished the Thomist project you and I are talking about into a religion of God, nature, and nature's law, right? God's law, and nature's law, and man, it was a religion of natural law, we would end up with a religion that was complete, understandable, and non-false, which would be interesting, because that would be the natural unification of all the religions. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that arc.
I slipped and fell down. I'm gonna get you one of those little help buttons, man.
Well, there was a lot of interesting stuff in there, but
that was good, man. That was very interesting. So my point was this: is that they have been apparently successful at hijacking the government.
But that's what religions do. All religions are seditious. The problem.
I know, but what do you call them when they're successful?
They're victorious, but they're not. It doesn't mean they're good.
I didn't say they were good.
No. I'm not trying to. I know, not you. The problem we have is that there's a thing called a natural religion.
Yeah.
right. And the Japanese still practice naturalism.
Yes.
Some of the Chinese too, right?
Yes.
Right. Then there's an unnatural religion, and then there's an
Social
organized.
construction, right?
Right. These
Right.
are socially constructed. Natural religion is just true, right? I am recognizing a debt to my ancestors and nature, and if I want to my state, right? That's the natural religion, right? Nature, ancestors, and state, right? Which is my people, right? That's my debt. Well, those are true debts, and there's a reason to celebrate and pay those debts and make offerings, right? Because that's what,
Right.
which is a feast offering. There's donations. There's a reason to do all that, right? The problem is it only works if your people aren't shit.
Okay.
All right. So
What do you call it when the resistance overcomes that which they were resisting?
conquest.
What do you call it when the government is controlled by the conquistadors?
Well, I mean, this is the issue: are you having conquest by social construction and credentialism?
Yes.
Or are you conquest by demonstrated competency? And so this is the two things. So you have the three things. You have the British method, which is what we have, right? You have the Russian method, and you have the Semitic method. And these are three different sort of examples, right, of conquest by force, conquest by trade, conquest by force, conquest by undermining, seduction, right? Which is resistance, force, and change. Resistance, those are the only three things that can exist: resistance, force, and trade. That's the only three forces that can exist. So it's the only three forces that do exist.
Wait a minute. I'm focusing my attention on this: resistance, force, and trade. Okay.
Positive, negative, and equilibrium, right? And so the universe has to work this way. There's no choice.
I'm conceptualizing this: resistance, force, and trade. And the trade is an equilibrium, but an equal sign is the mathematic representation of it. And we have discussed it as two parallel lines. And there is no parallel in the universe. There's just curvature, and it will intersect. And so it's like it's constantly being renegotiated in time, over time.
We're constantly adapting. The problem is, if you create a resistance movement that's successful, it's made by a via positiva, which will stagnate and eventually decline. If you create a force,
so I'm like I'm regarding it as this is faster the better. The stagnation and decline, faster is better.
Correct. So what's the most adaptive? Trade. Right? What's the most certain? Decline. Stagnation, decline. What's the next most adaptive? Force. So what's the most adaptive and innovative? What's this one? So it just works in a really simple triangle, which is, you're either going to innovate and adapt, you're going to extend it by force, and then you're going to resist its extremes. So the problem is you want to maintain a trifunctional equilibrium between market computations, limits, and enforcement, and resistance. And that's it. And no matter what we do, we're stuck with this fucking triangle because it's just physics. The only thing humans can do that the rest of the universe can't do is that we can predict and outwit and change, right? But we're also bound by debts to one another, right? We're subject to the problem of there's a limit to irreciprocity. Now, technically, a debt in a trade, right, over time is an irreciprocity that's later offset by a reciprocity. But that's the only thing we can do is buy time. That's
Right.
what we do that's different from the physical world. But in other words, we're just bound by the same laws of nature. The sexes represent the two calculations, right? The agreements between the sexes, the trades represent the trade or the equilibriums. And then the females use seduction and into non-adaptation. The males use capitalization to defend, and the ascendant males use innovation adapt and to find service between parties. And these are just this system. It's just the laws, the one law of the universe at scales at which people have the ability to remember and to predict. That's it. It's just a really simple thing. The problem is when you reduce all the world to just, well, male, female, and trades, you become aware of there's two things that have happened. The world, the universe is actually a really hostile place and isn't very nice at all. And so we've tried to create all these dances to make the male and female come together with the least friction and the greatest enjoyment out of fighting against the universe to survive.
Right.
Then however, once we've done that, we've created these dances, these mythologies, whatever, then we eventually lose sight, like all organizations do, of their original purpose.
Right.
And we become convinced that that's the gravity, and that's the law rather than the compensation. And so we don't look. Once I look at this chain of female, male, masculine, feminine, female, male, feminine, masculine, feels, empathizes, systemizes, social construction, demonstrated competence, positivity, positive and negative, wants and limits. Once you just go through this entire chain, you realize the world is basically just male and female cognition negotiating on behalf of its side and trying to get what it wants at the lowest cost by getting a discount or a parasitism rather than a trade.
Okay, so I was gonna mention that because trade is the
equal sign.
Is the equal sign, but it can be a theft, which is to say parasitism. It could be a parasitism instead of a
right, because we can create a false. This is what you got. We started. Let's tie this back to gambling. What is gambling? It's a promise of reciprocity that you benefit from not working. In other words, if I'm helping gambling, I benefit from people's failure. If I sell insurance, I benefit from failure. If I sell advertising, the people who selling the advertising vehicle benefit from failure. Right? The people who all these loan sharks, I benefit from failure. So all these things are seduction into benefit. They're baiting into a hazard. And so what we need to do is eliminate the ability to bait into hazard, which has been really the problem throughout history. Europeans don't do it, but we are really, because we don't do it, we're highly vulnerable for those people who do it. Because we think we're getting a discount in something for nothing. We're not. We're getting stolen from by baiting into hazard.
By being baited into hazard.
Right. Under the plausible deniability that it's just an accident of nature. It's not. If that was the case, there wouldn't be any profit in it, right? It's actually statistically probable that the reason they get you to invest in financial instruments is that they profit whether you win or lose, or they wouldn't do it.
I think that's a perfect segue to our next conversation into lying. What I would like to do is start a new video. Does that work for you?
I know, I'm trying to make sure I have the juice. I think I have the juice. Well, I mean, the things we just talked about were pretty important.
They were. I appreciate it. And I'm like, I'm trying to get you done with your book, man. And I'm like, I don't want to divert your energy into other products. Does that make sense?
Today's my birthday.
It is your birthday, and you get to do whatever you want. just like,
Well, I'm celebrating tomorrow.
especially today. If I had coffee, I have water, but I don't have coffee, but it's in my coffee cup. I'm going to raise a glass to your mother on your birthday.
Yes,
She did
thank
all
you,
the
Mom.
work.
Thank you, Mom. You raised me right.
Did a good job.
And everything that you disapprove of isn't your fault. It's my own.
That's right. It's all
mom
you're
loved
doing,
me.
Kurt.
My mom loved me.
Yeah.
She just wanted more of my attention, right? Wanted more attention, and she wanted to be more empathic. And I'm like, I'm a guy. I'm a man. I don't do those things. Go find your girlfriends. I just want to say, oh, can I tell you? Can I tell a story?
Sure.
So I'm talking to a friend of mine, female friend of mine. She's in her 40s, so it's a very smart lady. And we're talking about relationships. And I'm saying, well, I have actually 3 tricks I use with women because this is why women aren't complicated to me, right? They're complicated in the sense that understanding them at any given moment is impossible, but making them happy is relatively easy process of training. The first is you figure out what makes them feel safe and you give it to them. It takes about 2 years to figure that out and give it to them. I view this as man's adaptation. In other words, how do men need to adapt to women? Find out what makes her feel safe and give it to her. If what makes her feel safe is consumption, get rid of her. But otherwise, most women will feel safe by some combination of things that are somewhat unique. And I, look at Love Languages, that sort of book, as a sort of set of clues. The second thing is, how do you help women overcome neurosis?
Oh, yeah.
And which is a hard problem for women because they're not us, right? We have drawers because we think in drawers, right? We don't have a problem with neurosis, right? If I'm thinking about this, that's all I'm thinking about, right? Whatever. And basically, we're not really that afraid. It's more like these are problems I got to solve more than fears I got to have. But then that's not the same. They have fears and things are all mixed together and they pop out of nowhere for no reason. And, so you see that's what's his name's 4 agreements, which is don't take it personally.
Right.
Speak the truth at all times. Don't take it personally. I don't know what the other 2 are. And so what I actually do is when a woman gets into a state, I ask her those 4 questions.
Okay.
And what will happen over the time is that they will start to ask themselves the 4 questions.
Oh, I see. You trained them into it.
And the last one I have, which is part 3, is I say, what's the worst that can happen? And then I walk through what we're going to do. And almost always it doesn't matter. It's a solvable problem. Right? And after a time, they start saying, well, what's the worst that can happen? So in my view, it takes 2 years to train a woman, right? And 2 years for you to adapt to her. Adapting to her is adapting to what makes her feel safe. Men, adapting to us is easy. Feed us, fuck us, make sure we get enough sleep.
Right. It's like, that's as hard as it is.
And it's basically, men are just like children. When you see children, every time you see your kid, you say, oh, how, you're always happy to see them. You never are unhappy right? And you say, oh, great. Hey, we're having an adult conversation. Now come here, I'll give you a hug. And then you're going to let us go. Okay. Yeah. Right. And you got to overcome that need for attention right now, but that's okay. So that's great. Women have to do the same to men. Oh, you're here. Great. Here's a hug. Right. That feed, fuck, sleep. I mean, it's really that simple. So I was explaining this to her. She's like, she says, it's like, that's disturbing that women.
Now, welcome to my world, baby.
As disturbing that women can all be satisfied by that way. And I'm like, well, I mean, the only difference between women is that they're more dependent on feeling, right? The feelings. So the problem with women is they like what they are familiar with. So if a woman is familiar with certain kind of man, she'll be attracted to him. So the problem is forcing her into association with the kind of men that she needs to be attracted to instead of the kind of men that not. This is really dad's job.
Right.
This is really dad's job, is like, this guy, we need, and it's mom's job to help, right? But you got to make sure that if dad says he's not a good guy, dad is right, no matter
Right.
what you think.
That's really the paternalistic part. Is the
It's
part
just,
that-
well, it's because we know what we are, right? You know,
it's
and I
like,
was,
that's not going to work, kids.
you know, I used to get the set of reactions because in the part of the country I'm from, my family is very old, right? And
Yeah.
so there's a little status, not a lot, but there's a little status associated with it, especially
Right.
if you're from the area. So I either got one of two reactions. Oh, great, you caught a good one. So the father was really happy, right? Or I got the opposite. He just wants pussy. And you know what the difference is? The father actually knew the value of his daughter. He knew the market value of his daughter.
Wow.
Right? I always got one of those two reactions. Right? And it was really fat. Does it make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So fathers have a different understanding of people than mothers.
That's
A
right.
mother has an empathic and supportive or approval, disapproval. But dad's just looking at problems.
Like, right, how's this going to go sideways?
Right. And so, the problem was whenever I learned very quickly that the fathers are never wrong. When the way a father is treating me is actually right. Right. I had one case where he didn't think I was good enough. This from very wealthy people in Westchester. He was wrong, of course, but I understood why he was thinking that.
Right.
He's the guy who asked me, "What do you want? What do you want to be?" And I said, and he couldn't understand my answer, which is that I just want to run a company. I don't care what the company does, right? As long as it's moral. But I just want to run a company. I'd prefer it be in the middle size, not too small, not too large. And that's what I want to do. And that wasn't precise enough answer. One of his sons wanted to be an astronaut, ended up being a loser. The other one wanted to be something else like that, ended up being a loser.
They had very precise answers, was not the right answer.
Not the right answer.
I like the imprecise answer. It's like fuzzy logic.
Well, it's like, I looked at, it's just, you do that because you're in an entrepreneurial, my family's been entrepreneurs since like there's recorded history. So, it's obvious, right? It's just a family tradition of, you think like that, right? You think, I'm going to grow up, be like dad and run a business, right? I mean, or you just hear so much about business, it makes sense with you. I'm sure the same is true for academics, actors, and doctors, right? I mean, if there's a family full of doctors, you're going to hear enough about doctoring that it's an advantage and it makes sense to you. And certain things happen to actors, they're all fucking crazy as far as I can turn, but fine, right? And it's certainly true for artists, right? So you have that. So I looked at medicine and I'm like, I can't do that, right? I looked at law and I can't do that. And they're both for the same reasons. There's too much negativity and I'm too sensitive. I looked at my family's funeral businesses and I'm like, I can't do that because I'm too sensitive, right? So I ended up with engineering because it doesn't. I'm too. There's no sensitivity involved, right? So. In any event, where was I going with that? Oh, so the whole funny problem is that you actually can teach mindfulness to women, right? You would only have to actually repeat that constantly, those 3 steps constantly throughout female development. And it's really that simple. Girls, find out what makes you feel safe.
Huh?
Actually, I forgot the fourth, excuse me, the fourth one is what kind of man to be with. Make sure you know you will find yourself attracted to what you understand. Make sure what you understand is what's good for you. Right?
Oh,
Here are
yeah.
the four agreements. This is how to, whenever you're reacting to somebody, ask those four questions.
Reiterate the last two questions.
Excuse me, I got it. I missed one. So here's how to be attracted to the right guy. Right, is learn how to be attracted to the right guy. Shit, what was the middle one? I just had it.
What makes you safe?
It's because it's what's the worst that can happen? What are the four agreements? Learn what makes you feel safe and be attracted to the right guy. So those four things. If you can teach that, that's how you teach mindfulness to women, because it's just self-monitoring.
Yeah.
Right? Now, can you do the same thing to guys? It's not. It's guys need to be other focused. It's competitive.
Right. It's
So
external.
So you just try to say you have to make it goal focused. Because
You have to do
women,
what?
you have to make it goal focused for guys. In other words, the thing about stoicism is it's very action oriented.
That's right.
Right. So
Operational.
guys, we're not trying to suppress neuroticism, which is the woman's problem. We're trying to direct aggression. Aggression is the wrong word. It's dominance expression, right? Which is value, which is value creation. So a woman is or becomes, a man has to, excuse me, a woman is, a man has to become, right?
Yeah.
And so you need to create this stuff. So I'd like to be able to work on the Stoic commands to get them as narrow as the female commands. The point here that I'm trying to make with the female commands is that it's just 4 steps, right? But everybody has one of those steps. Nobody has put together a system that covers the whole spectrum, which is how to self-regulate. Men, we self-regulate simply by competition. That's the most. I mean, if you make guys play sports, right, and you teach them basic contract, that's pretty. It's just.
That's it.
Men are simple, right?
That's right.
So for men, it's mostly like one of the ones I've been cognizant of lately is the difference between is correcting, breaking contact, fighting, and punishing.
Right.
And so that's an escalation system of men's responsibility for the use of dominance or force. So that's one of the things that we have to get. Then there's the competition one. I have to be able to. The woman one was easy. Was not easy. The woman was easy because it was the problem women face is simple, right? It's just hard to solve. The problem men face is actually just how do I get this creature to exert dominant expression to the production of commons instead of privates? Because do men usually get really that offended by it or whatever people think? Not really. We get offended by actions and threats. So I think it's more important to deal with that one. So I want to get the female one I've got down, a male one I want to get down to the same level of detail. And from that perspective, it becomes really easy to move from the production of agency through a few habits to the production of law and the production of manners, the production of virtues. I mean, this needs to be, as we invest very highly in stupid shit and we don't invest in the stuff that matters.
That's right.
I mean, they're trying to get us to invest in something false, which is that diversity is a good, instead of get us invest in something true, which is agency is a good, at which point diversity becomes meaningless.
Diversity has no value.
Yeah.
It has no meaning. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
All right.
That's a
So-
good. That's good. That's for the people writing the. That's for Martin. Diversity has no value.
No, it should have no value. The only reason it has value is if you don't have agency. Now, there's a great example yesterday. I'll try to find a clip and ask Martin to put it in a link to it on the video. It's an Oregonian woman who's clearly middle-class white person who's educated and very articulate, complaining about some immigrant guys driving. She says, look, this is Oregon. We use manners here, right? If you want to drive like that, go back to where you came from. And he accused her of racism, and she's accusing him of bad manners. And he says that's racist. I was like, no, it's just bad manners. Right? This is the problem. Diversity becomes a problem if you don't know what good is or acceptable is. Driving like an East Asian is not okay. Walking down aisles like a Hindu in a grocery store is not okay.
I don't know what that means.
They're oblivious to everyone around them. They don't, right? A Germanic person
I
pulls
see.
the
I
cart
see.
to the side and makes way.
I see.
You don't just
I understand
stop.
you, because it's like it's insensitivity to others.
Correct. Spatial, and it's irresponsible. We're hyper conscious of the commons. Now, this happened for interesting reasons in Europe. Is that you were expected to make way for the nobility, the aristocracy, right? Well, however, this became good practice of making way for everybody, right? So it became a norm. Well, so that's how the aristocracy trained people to behave well, right? Or Hispanics don't know that you're not that loud in your neighborhood, right? Or that
That one hits home. That one hits because I've got some very loud guys that drive around these crazy.
I live in my house is in Redmond. Every every house is painted some color of earth gray or brown, right? Or coffee, right? I mean, we had some Hispanics move and try to paint their house blue. They painted their house blue, right? bright sunshine, right blue. Okay, now we have a covenant.
Oh my.
Right? And so I was like, I told them, please don't make me do this. We can do whatever we want. This is America. Nope. So we sued them into repainting their house, which they never forgave us for. But it created a lesson for the whole neighborhood, is that you don't do that. Well, it's not okay to paint your house Mediterranean blue, which you would do down in Mexico, right? If you live in fucking Redmond, right? It doesn't matter what you think or what your opinion is. That's you're bringing your a cultural taste that's out of place into a place that has its own aesthetic. So we use the covenants. I got in charge of that somehow, and I'm the worst person to be in charge of anything like that. I forget what's going on. I don't keep track of stuff. I could. No, it's because I was willing to say the truth. So people put me in charge, and I'm like, well, there's raising money for this. And of course, I don't keep the receipts in order and whatever. And I'm like, I tell them, I'm going to fuck this up if you put me in charge of this. I don't want to be in charge. Well, you have to. I end up getting one of my neighbors pissed off because I'm not organized. No, I'm running $100 million business. I have my health issues, right? And God knows what else is going on. And I can't keep track of the $300 you guys are worried about for creating a new sign and doing this, right? I'm the wrong guy. I told you I didn't want to do this. I'm only going to do it. Well, I'm going to do it if you do it. Well, okay, but that you got to pay the consequences. Who knows? The last guy that needs to be in charge of worried about $300. I don't even. That doesn't even make it to my equivalent of noise.
Lost that in the cushion of your car.
So So any event,
Why?
so anyway, so they painted the house. So you have these problems, and I'm like, well, you either integrate or you don't, because you're integrating into high trust society. If you want to live, the reason you came here is the benefits of a high trust society. Then you have to adapt to the behaviors of a high trust society. Those benefits are costly. They mean you suppress a lot of your impulses to take temporary advantage of situations, and that you have to pay the high cost of being aware. I mean, you watch how, if you look at how the fucking people in Thailand drive, it's fucking hysterical. I mean, you know what their death rate is? I mean, it's like they have their death rate from traffic accidents is, oh my fucking God, right? I mean, it's insane. Or you look at those videos of China where people kidnap people in the street and children in broad daylight, and nobody does anything. Well, those are norms. I get in trouble with, I live in an area where there's a lot of Italians. Italians, they're loud, but they keep nice property. It's tacky as fuck, but they keep nice property, right? So I mean, it's kind of hard. They run nice little businesses. They're always cheating on the side somehow, but so what? I mean, so you look at these things and you're like, well, not everybody can be German.
Oh my.
Well, I mean, the point is that the point is to make fun of it. I mean, the point of comedy,
Right?
making light of things, is to say the truth without denigration. And the answer is I mean, I had to learn moving other country I lived in, to how to not be so American, which is fucking hard, because we're outspoken, we're demanding, we're a bit loud, we're very forward, right? And this isn't appreciative. Like I fit great in England because I'm overtly friendly, but whenever I'm in Germany, it's like they look at me like I have three heads. I have to like turn the volume down to 3. My gregariousness has to go down, but I love their manners, and they have no fucking sense of humor. Whereas Italians, if you want to visit like cultured Italy, there's southern Italy, which isn't Italy. There's northern Italy.
Yeah.
And you can play with Italian. They're funny people. They're a lot of fun, really. You can't do business with them because nothing's fucking predictable past lunch. But or you realize that Russians are more German than German when it comes to business. They're just not friendly about it. Right. So, I mean, it's just everybody trying to do business with Arabs. Like, I mean, it used to be you couldn't do business with the Indians because they couldn't tell the difference between truth and desirable. I mean, it's like just weird. And then they fixed. The Chinese have come quite a way. Japanese have gotten as good as we are, better. But the new generation of Arabs is getting there, surprisingly.
It's interesting, isn't it?
And so, you see it happening, but it used to be that, a promise from an Arab is merely a handshake saying, sure, whatever. And cheating is part of their thing. Like in some part of the world, corruption is part of the thing. But in the Arab world, cheating and getting away with stuff.
Get this story. This is a funny story. There's a fireman who trains at
Hold on, I want to, before somebody jumps on me and you tell me, it's like, the world has changed in this manner and more than 20 years than it has in the previous 2000. So there's a lot of going on right now, and thanks to internet and mass communication, and education. But so the examples I'm giving, they're really well understood facts, especially prior to 2000. But over the past 20 years, it's changed a lot. Anyway, go ahead.
There's a fellow who was a fireman at our CrossFit gym, right?
At your what?
At our CrossFit gym. And so this guy has made $1 million and lost it more than once. And it's like he started by being a trader in turquoise. And he traded to the teachers to get better grades. He would trade with jewelry makers, and he ended up finding a turquoise source in China, and he was taking it to the Middle East and selling buckets of turquoise for $25,000. Okay. And he's like he's telling the stories in there. He's got a bucket of turquoise and he's at the market. He's selling it to the guy who's going to make some jewelry. Who knows what he's going to market it again, probably.
Sure.
But this guy's looking at every piece. And this he just wants to get his money and leave. He just wants to just give me 25 grand. I'll give you $5,000 off. No, the guy has to check every piece, right? I just want to get on my plane and leave.
No, but it because they have to. It's really funny. One of the great things about all this mass video is that we get to see things that get talked about, but you've never seen before. Like they don't like the word Berber, but Berbers trading camels. As I watched like a 45-minute documentary on some guys trading camels. Fucking hysterical. I mean, I know we have the thing called horse trading here.
Yes.
But what I gathered from it is it's actually easier to tell stuff about camels than horses. Like I bought a race. I mean, I bought a fancy $100,000 horse, right? So you get X-rays,
right?
You get you get histories, you get ever, right? Because it's you're buying a sports car basically,
right?
Right. And he still wasn't that great, to be honest with you. You got to spend 200. To get a good horse. I bought my horse, let me tell you, my horse for 10 grand. And we're talking about a horse that won't let you fall off. We're talking about a great horse, only 10 grand. But if it doesn't have that little brand on there that says, Hanoverian,
right?
It's like not having fucking Rolls Royce on the side of it. Anyway, they really are beautiful though. Hanoverian, they're wow.
What were you going to say about training camels? Or it's just a general statement.
But it's like, so the point with horses is like, we know about horses. We don't know shit about camels, right?
Right.
But those guys, they know everything about camels and they just look at them and play with them and whatever. And they're like, of course, a camel's more durable. I mean, a horse is pretty fragile compared to a camel. So these guys are trading the camels and talking about also. It's fucking fascinating. But the game they play, and they love the goddamn game.
Oh, yeah.
There's like, it's like, don't cheat me out of my God. It's like when I tease you guys and you evade my punchlines or screw me with something. You've taken all the fun out of it for me. Well, it's like those guys are like, they want to have the fun. They want to show they're masters of their craft by playing this game. It's fucking hysterical. They're the same shit they were doing 800 years ago, right? Aside from there's certain bits of technology hanging around, like the metal clasp on the camel's harness, right? And the guy's got a cell phone. The difference is zero, and it's just fucking hysterical. So I just love to see all this going on, but we've eradicated all that from our society because it's an opportunity. So we show status by the price is what it is. That's because I'm making an honest statement, right? And the price is negotiable because that would be you trying to take advantage of it. And we find honor in that, and they find honor in that. They find honor in cheating, and we find honor in not cheating. It's just, the Chinese system.
So it burnishes your reputation, your sense of self-status.
Yeah. And we do most of it in our country through dress, vocabulary, manners, and what we do for a living or what we do for entertainment. Yada, yada, yada. All right. So did I kill like 11:30, 12:30, 1:30 at 2 hours? 3 hours? We've been at this for 3 hours?
Nearly.
Holy shit.
Wore you out, man. Sorry. I hope you have a
No.
happy birthday, Kurt. I want to thank you for sitting with me, and I enjoyed chatting with you.
Love you, brother.
Well, I'd send you the link.
This is going to make some interesting clips out of this one.
I think so.
By the way, Martin, thank you for what you do for us. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
sir. All right. Take care, Kurt.
Bye-bye.